Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the South Florida Tribune podcast. My name is Scott Morganroth, along with Ron Renzy, our legal analyst and a good friend of the show. Ron, how's everything going?
Everything's pretty good, Scott. How are you doing this evening?
We enter a new way of how we go ahead and do these broadcasts. We get to do them face to face. I haven't seen you over at the Coral Springs Chamber lately, but get to do it via Zoom, and now this is the way we're going to be doing it from now on. So, ready to rock and roll?
I'm ready. This is exciting. This is different, and let's do it.
Absolutely. We have a new era, obviously, in broadcasting as far as we're concerned, and we'll talk about the fact that your advice to everybody out there is read anything before you sign it. Is that correct, Ron?
That's correct. That's correct. My just a little tip today is, and I know it's hard to do, and it's not always practical, but you should always read everything before you sign it. A lot of people think an agreement's going to go one way, or they do it on a handshake, and then they have a document that's signed that's totally different than what they thought it was. So the suggestion is always read before you sign. It doesn't do a heck of a lot of good after you sign.
All right, so let's talk about some of the examples of things that you're talking about, Ron.
Sure.
Let's talk about the old non-compete clause. I know it's bitten a lot of people in the past, and you know what? I don't care what part of the country you're in. Okay, the old non-compete is a thing that bites you, and it bites you badly.
It certainly does, Scott. I mean, yes, you need to sign a non-compete to get a job, and sometimes it's a take it or leave it, but don't always think that. Sometimes you can negotiate with the employer. Sometimes the clause is a lot more onerous than you think, and sometimes you can negotiate a little bit. Maybe change the scope down a little bit, the duration down a little bit, maybe not 2 years, maybe 1 year, maybe not 50 miles, maybe 10 miles, but nevertheless read it, because you can get caught and then all of a sudden you leave one job thinking you go into a better opportunity, and guess what? You can't do it because your non-compete prohibits it. It's not a situation anybody wants to be in.
Now let's talk about an employment agreement. That's really interesting, Ron, because nowadays when you run across an employment agreement, they have some things called a credit check. Explain.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. A lot of times with appointments, they do a credit check, a background check, and even lately a criminal check. So that's something you have to consider whether you're comfortable with. Now, if it's your dream job, maybe you're fine with it. But your employment agreements could also have your salary, your benefits, the rules and regulations of the company. So just read it like anything else, but it's a lot more in depth than most people think.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. I understand the credit check and the background check, but I'll tell you what, people don't understand that nobody's looking to bring on the next felon, that's for sure, Ron.
That's for sure, Scott. That's for sure.
Now, so let's talk about something that is really, really interesting, Ron, and that's that thing called a purchase of a sale of a home. What's important to look for in that?
Well, it depends whether you're buying or selling, but you want to just make sure you know what your rights and obligations are. Are there things disclosed? Are there things not disclosed? How many days till closing? Is it contingent upon financing? Because you don't want to buy a house if you don't know you're going to get the money. Sometimes you want to buy a house contingent on the sale of your other house if you're moving from one to the other. The fact of the matter is, if you want something in there, read it. Don't take anybody's word for it. Sometimes you think, hey, I'm buying a house and the seller is the nicest person in the world, that's going to be fine, and then you end up in court. So read the agreements, and if you need changes, ask for them.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that people have to understand, that when they're going ahead and getting a home, you have to make sure that those home inspections are definitely included, because if you don't have home inspections, you're in real trouble.
That's a vital point. You're absolutely right. You want your inspection, and make sure you get your own inspector, somebody that you trust and feel comfortable with.
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the more underrated aspects of things. So we go ahead from purchasing the sale of a home. How about the purchase or sale of a car? Now, I know nowadays buying a car is so much different because you can actually buy cars online. So this becomes a very sticky situation, doesn't it?
It really does, because if you're buying a car online, sometimes you're buying a car from another state, and the contract may provide that you're going to have to abide by that state laws. It may change some of the rights and obligations that you have. You may be paying for the transport, you may not. So read it before you sign it. Understand a lot when you're dealing with big items, houses and cars. You may only have a limited ability to bargain, but use your ability to the fullest. If you don't like the deal, don't sign the deal. If you didn't like it from the beginning, it's not going to get any better.
So tell me about electronic signatures. I think nowadays most of us people are used to the old face-to-face regular, but electronic signatures to me are very, very, very interesting.
Yeah, electronic signatures are here. They're the definitely wave of the future. And now with COVID-19, it's definitely the way. Basically, in most jurisdictions, like here in Florida, electronic signatures are valid. So if you sign on your computer and you think I'm only clicking a mouse and my name shows up, or you're doing something electronic signing or a DocuSign or one of the other companies are out there, it's valid, it's legal, it's binding. Don't think because you have to put pen to paper anymore. Electronic signatures count and you won't get out of it.
All right, so now let's go on to the next purchase, and that's that purchase of a sale involving something like gold coins or art. I mean, that's unreal. Does it really come down to gold coins and art are that valuable?
Well, they are. I mean, I've dealt with some clients and stuff, and gold is $1,900 or so an ounce right now, and so you can have a coin that's worth several $1,000s. A piece of art, maybe I don't know much about art. Maybe you do, Scott, but art is worth a lot of money. So you don't want to just sell something and buy something willy-nilly and trust somebody. Get it in writing, and also the who has custody of it, who has to take care of it, especially something like a painting that's very valuable. What if it's in somebody, a third party's custody and it gets damaged and you're out a lot of money? Or a gold coin, it could be worth a lot of money, but they're very small. So you want to just make sure everything's in writing and you feel comfortable with it before you either spend your hard-earned money or give away your hard-earned valuables.
Can you believe that in this COVID-19 era, we're talking about coin shortages? My goodness, I'm holding on to every single coin that I can. Not that every business person that's listening to this thing wants to know when I give him a coin, okay, he's keeping them all and turning in that thing called paper, which a lot of people think money may grow off of trees, but the problem is money may not grow off of trees, but the paper for the money does come off of trees. So
That's true. I never thought you hear coin shortages, but it's a world we live in now, I suppose.
I mean, really, think about coin shortage. When was the last time that you went ahead and turned in a coin? Now, of course, nowadays everything's done through electronically anyways, through the credit card, the debit card, and all that stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think of the last time I paid cash. Unfortunately, I use the debit card and credit card. But no, well, how many coins you have in your? Bet you look in your pocket right now. I bet you don't have a ton of coins in there.
No, I stick them in the those things called pickle jars or baseball banks or whatever the case may be. And no, I only had dollar bills, and I do pay cash every now and then when I go to my regular lunch places, which are far
Mhm.
and few between nowadays. I like to go to restaurants, except when I'm on a date night. But I'm, coin shortages. Here we are, Ron. We're talking about coin shortages. Well, if you look at a coin in your little bank here, who's to say how old that thing really is or what it's really valuable? Is there really such a thing where looking at the dates of these things that quarter might be worth a lot more than we even realize?
I'm no expert, but I've heard that. People have told me that coins from days gone by are worth a lot more than the quarter or the half dollar or whatever it is. And then if it's real silver, it's more. And then gold, forget it. If you have a coin that's made out of gold, keep it. Be careful with it, and don't use it to buy a sandwich. Don't do that.
So what are you going to use to buy a sandwich? Let me ask
A
you a question.
dollar bill.
Yeah, that's right. So do you actually, I've always been curious, I'm married to a banker, but do you actually do deposits with a check through scanning it, sending it to the bank? Everybody's trying to get me to do it, but I'm not comfortable. Although I got to tell you, I do have direct deposit with my other half being there. But really, everybody's trying to teach me how to deposit a check by scanning it, but I'm not comfortable sending my information over there.
I've tried it and it seems to work. I know there's a lot of people that are a little hesitant to send their money over the internet or send their information over the internet because it's just this wide, scary place. But I guess to each his own. I know a lot of people that do everything electronically. That's not me, but some people do everything electronically.
Yeah, I mean, let me tell you, I've had to acclimate slowly but surely with a lot of this stuff. And I got to tell you, it has been a challenge doing it, but at some point or another, when do we deal with the human element with all these things? And what I mean by that is all the things that we've talked about so far. So let's recap everything so far that we've discussed here during the broadcast.
Sure.
We've talked about non-compete agreements. We've talked about employment agreements, purchase of sale of home, purchase of sale of a car, purchase of sale of valuable such as coins or art. And now let's move on to the fact that we have a contract for sale of any goods. Why don't you go ahead and explain what that means to everybody?
Sure, it'd be a written contract for the sale of pretty much anything, whether you're in the business of selling pillows, whether you're selling items out of your house to one person and you want a contract for it. A good is basically any tangible object you can touch, from a pen to your microphone to basically any tangible thing you can trust is a good. Now, sometimes, right, if it's just an arm length transaction, you want to give me 50 cents for the pen, I don't think we need a contract. But if you're selling something either that's valuable, personal, hard to replace, rare, make sure you get a contract.
If you had to put a monetary value for a contract of a sale of any goods, could you give our listeners and viewers an idea of what that monetary value should be?
Well, that's a good question, Scott. It could really be anything. It could be something for let's say, $150, $200, to these giant corporations that do transaction multi-millions and even $1 billion. So they're all contracts. Now, maybe the one for $1 billion is a little more complicated than the chair or the item or the bed for $100. But a contract's a contract. Now, maybe that contract will be a paragraph, and the billion dollar transaction will be 500 pages. It's still a contract.
Wow. That to me is unbelievable. I mean, when you talk about $150 all the way to anything else, and then you talk about the fact that everything is so interrelated here, because then you talk about a purchase of sale, $150, the DocuSigns. I mean, it really does come full circle. So with that said, let's move on to the next point, Ron. Contract for services. Why don't you go into a definition and a detail what that actually means?
Sure, a contract for services is basically a thing that is not a good. A contract services could be legal services. They could be journalistic services. They could be somebody cleaning your house. They could be somebody painting your house. They could be somebody that's your personal fashion consultant. It's basically anything that's not something you hold in your hand, a service you provide. Now, let's say you want to work as a broadcaster and you want to provide your services. You enter into contract for services. We do that all the time. If you go to your accountant, you go to your lawyer, anything like that, that's a service. And a lot of times you'll end up signing a contract. So you know how much you're paying, whether it's for a flat fee or an hourly basis, and what service you're getting in return. So those you have to read very carefully. You don't just sign them willy-nilly, because you'll be paying more than you think, and you might not be getting as much as you think. So like anything else, read the contract.
Yeah, and it's funny when you talk about, once again, contract for services. Let's go ahead and connect a few dots if we can, Ron. Contract for services, tie them into non-compete clauses. I think the one thing that's a common denominator here is the interrelated nature of how these things tie together in a very indirect way, isn't it?
It is. It is. Things tied together all the time, whether it's a non-compete coupled with an employment agreement, or let's say the sale of a home and a second contract to maybe to lease the home to somebody else, or a condo, or whether it's for services and what is the other person getting in return. And now sometimes, not often, but sometimes the contract will call for service for service. So let's say I'll paint your house in exchange of you cooking me dinner for a month. It sounds kind of wacky, but that could be in a contract too. It doesn't have to be exchange of money. There has to be what's called consideration, which is simply something of value.
Or what you call in our industry, the media, like a trade. I'll give you airtime, and meanwhile you give me services. I know the one thing that's been common in the media is the ability to trade one service for another. Now, would you find that
Absolutely.
many future employment agreements, Ron, will incorporate remote responsibilities and Zoom calls into the equation? Because now we talk about modification. What I mean by modification, before COVID-19, nobody thought anything of it. But then you talk about being legal, you've always billed for your service in such a way. Some legal people do it by the hourly or contingencies or whatever the case may be. But
Right.
now and of course now in your industry, being in you're able to actually go to courts by doing it remotely as well. So
That's correct.
do you find that future employment agreements are going to find remote working arrangements in the future.
I think that's a very high likelihood. I mean, we're in a changing environment. It's changing every second. And I don't think it's going to totally go back, in my humble opinion. I think there's going to be a lot of remote work to be done, and it's going to end up in employment agreements. Yeah. And some present agreements may be modified. You brought up the key word of modification. Agreements can be modified. Now, to modify an agreement, it has to be signed by both parties. One party can't modify an agreement on its own. But let's say the employer and employee to say, we need to change things up a little bit. Let's do what's called an addendum. Let's write it down. Let's modify it. And that's our new agreement. But yeah, remote work, as we see, a lot of people were very hesitant about it, but there wasn't a choice and people are adapting.
I think the one thing that's interesting in my business, Ron, is that we did, Steve Ballesteri and I went ahead and did a broadcast for no limits on remote reporting, so to speak. And now we're finding ourselves covering from teams from a distance. I've seen that throughout the course of the Miami Marlins, where a lot of the beat writers and broadcasters stay from home. We do everything with the Zoom capabilities. And now again, we're talking about potentially permanent changes for sure. And I know that this is one of those things that we're certainly going to address. On to the next point. One I've become more familiar with thanks to you. By the way, my name is Scott Morganroth. Alongside of me is Ron Renzy. We're doing this broadcast, get used to them through Zoom and the South Florida Tribune channel. It's something called copyright or trademark license. Go ahead, Ron, please provide some clarity on that one.
Sure. As you know from personal experience, you can register a trademark or a copyright. And sometimes people want to use it. They'll want to use the image, they'll want of a trademark, they'll want to use the writing, let's say if it's copyright. But you don't just willy-nilly let them use it. You have to, you as the owner, have to sign what's called a license, whether it's a limited license agreement, an unlimited license agreement for a certain time, certain duration. So you got to be careful about that, because if you work hard and let's say you get a trademark, um, and somebody else wants to use it and you're okay with that, you got to be careful how far you want them to use it, under what conditions. You don't want your good trademark sullied. Yes, you want to get paid for it, but you want to be careful what they're allowed to do. And that's why it's very important to have those agreements read.
Yeah, I think I've been pretty intrigued by the fact that I'm in the process of working on getting the Motor City Mad Mouth trademark. Of course,
Yes.
there'll be other categories to follow in the foreseeable future. I would find it hard to believe that I'd want to risk all the time that it's taken to even get the trademark and put it in somebody else's hands after the diligence and the complicated nature that it took to get it. Because when you talk about a lot of the different legal services that are out there, wouldn't you agree that trademarking is one of the most difficult and most comprehensive legal things that you can get into outside of an extended personal injury case that could take years?
Oh, I think it's a very complicated area. All intellectual property is copyright, trademarks, and patent. That's why it's not something I do. We give it to people that focus on that every day. It's not something you want to dabble into. It's not like you're going to be doing, I don't know, tenant evictions all day and then all of a sudden register a trademark. It's a detailed area, and as you found out from your own experience and the attorney that's been helping you, it takes a long time. It takes a lot of work and it takes a long time, but once you get it, it's very valuable, and time to celebrate when you get it. That's for sure.
Yeah, I don't see myself doing too many more after what I've gone through with this process. One trademark per lifetime with a few categories gets it done, although you never know what could happen, but right now I'm happy with that. So let's talk about pretty much making sure you read anything before you talk about pretty much any agreement. Then I want to get into a couple more specified areas as well.
Sure. Just thinking that I personally, my personal opinion, it's good sense to read anything before you sign it, just so you know. Now, I understand a lot of folks are probably thinking, well, I don't have a choice. If I want the credit card, I got to sign the agreement. True. If I want the loan, I got to sign the agreement. That's also true. A lot of these, we'll call them corporate agreements or take it or leave it, which is 100% true, but you just don't read it so you know what you're getting into. When you take out that loan, what's your obligations? How can you default? What can they get from you if you default? What are the parameters of it? Even if it's something as complicated as a mortgage, It's just good idea to know what's going on, or have an attorney that you trust go over it with you, just so you understand. That's all. Sometimes it's a take it or leave it. I understand that, but you got to know what you're taking or leaving.
Now, one of the most interesting agreements that unfortunately you deal with it through telemarketers, but you also deal with that at automobile dealerships as well. It's called that extended warranty, auto warranty. What are your thoughts about those extended warranties? Are they even worth the money that you put into them? And I know that there's a lot of different things that they do cover and they don't cover that a lot of consumers should be aware of.
Well, I think it's a personal choice, like any other agreement that you're paying your hard-earned money for. Just understand what the warranty does, what it doesn't do, how much it's going to cost you, not only now when you're buying it, but what it's going to cost you in the future. Let's say when you get the repair done. I've talked to a lot of people who love them. A lot of people don't. It's a personal, I think it's a personal choice, like most agreements you enter into. I think just be informed. One thing is my thoughts on that is, don't take somebody's word for it. Read it yourself.
Yeah, I mean, with those particular extended warranty agreements, nowadays, unfortunately, and you get it all over the country, but let's not lose sight of the fact that living in the Southern Florida area, we know we're talking about call center haven. There's a lot of these extended warranty places calling you in these boiler rooms. And I'll tell you, don't trust them. I mean, I know, in my opinion, when you start trusting a telemarketer talking about this, then you get these commitments and all that. And then you wonder how enforceable what is covered versus what. I hate to say that it's a scam, but in many respects, unless you have everything in writing and you have the face-to-face contact, I don't know. Extended warranties make me a little bit nervous for sure. Now, one other thing that I probably should know a little bit more about, in fact, I do, is that thing called sports memorabilia. Now, we
Uh,
talked about being able to authenticate something, whether it's a souvenir baseball or, I remember many instances where, give the ball back to the player, they won't authenticate it. But then you also have a lot of things called eBay, Amazon or whatever. But what about sports memorabilia? Have you seen anything about things about agreements with those? I know that's probably an area that you're probably don't hear about a lot of, but sports memorabilia, Ron, is a big business.
well, I don't know that much about it, but yes, I know it's a huge business, and I know a lot of money and items change hands. And like anything else, buyer beware. Read what you sign. And I think you hit it right on the head, Scott. If you're not sure, well, even if you are sure, you should get it authenticated by an expert or somebody that has experience. It can give you some kind of something in writing saying, yes, this baseball, that's that player's signature. Or we're not so sure. Just like anything else, just know what you're getting into. Sometimes I like anything else, especially with sports memorabilia, you get so excited that you're getting this thing maybe you wanted all your life. And if it doesn't turn out to be what you thought, you're not going to be that happy about it, unfortunately.
Now, a couple of other areas I want to dive deeper into is the credit check. Why don't you go into more details about a credit check? After all, when people look for a job, okay, some of them are pretty extensive, aren't they? So,
Yeah, some of them are pretty extensive. They go way back and they do your whole history through all the credit agencies and that. And if you have to get permission for somebody to do a credit check, and that could be online. As you said, with the e-signature, it can be online, it can be in person. So just make sure you know what you're getting into, because they can be pretty extensive.
yeah, and let's talk about the old criminal check, background check as well. I mean, is there ever a time where somebody's record gets expunged and it'll ultimately come out down the road? Let's talk about the criminal background check and then we'll follow it with the expunge part.
Sure. I mean, criminal background checks are also very extensive, and they can dig up a lot of information. I even think we have somebody in the chamber that does background checks in our group. But from what I understand, they're extensive, and they could find. Put it this way: you're not going to hide stuff from somebody that knows what they're doing in a background check.
True. Now let's talk about the second part of the equation. I know that sometimes individuals will attempt to get their history expunged. What are your thoughts about somebody trying to get things expunged? Do they ultimately dig that stuff up, or does expunge actually mean permanently?
That's a question I'm not totally familiar with. We have to talk, maybe get a criminal lawyer on here to explain that. But I know a lot of things I've heard things were thought to be expunged, and they still are being able to be found out. So you got to be careful with that. But talk to your friendly neighborhood criminal lawyer to give you some suggestions on that.
Yeah, and like I said, there's always a gray area, and what we always know, Ron, as a loophole to get around anything. When you talk about contract for services, and I know there's a lot of different services out there, are there any ones that stand out a lot more that you have to be more conscious of? I know in the Southern Florida area, one of our big industries here is air conditioning, but this broadcast not only being heard in our area, but it'll also be seen around the country. Are there any specific areas that folks should concentrate on?
Well, I think you brought up a good point, Scott. Anything to do with your home, any contracts to enter into with your home, whether it's roofing, air conditioner, tile, rug, you know, reconstruction, remodeling, kitchens, bathrooms. You got to be careful about those contracts. Make sure you know what you're getting. And a lot of places, such as Florida, these people can put a lien on your house
Right.
if you don't pay, and that's also usually in the contract. So make sure you know what you're signing. That if it's a big ticket item, I would talk to your friendly neighborhood contract lawyer and maybe get an opinion on that before you sign.
Yeah, because I know a lot of times what'll happen is liens will be placed on someone's home if they have substandard credit is what'll happen. And a lot of individuals don't realize that unless you read everything from top to bottom, you might be mortgaging your house for a home improvement that you almost wish, holy Toledo, I got more than I bargained for. Do you see that happen a lot?
Unfortunately, I've seen cases where work will be done, and maybe the homeowner will say, "This really wasn't that good, and I don't want to pay," and they end up dispute, and then all of a sudden they're sued for lien foreclosure, and they're like, "What? What is this? They can't foreclose on my house," and the attorney finds out there's a lien on the house. And there's lien on house for services that were performed to the house, and the homeowner doesn't even know it. And then you end up with litigation. Everyone has lawyers. You have to get it sorted out. You may have to go to a trial, and it could be a big mess. So yeah, that happens, unfortunately, uh, probably more than people realize.
Let's go back to another area of interest that we briefly touched on, the purchase of a sale of a car. When you sell a vehicle privately, not talking about a trade-in, you certainly want to make sure that you have proper title and things like that. Titles could be a bit of a sticking point, Ron, when it comes to transfer to another automobile, can't they?
Yeah. That's one thing from my understanding, just seeing examples of people out there. You have to be really careful about the title and your license plate or your tag. That's sometimes called because sometimes you'll maybe sell a car, you'll give them the title, but they don't ever record it with the state that you live in, and it ends up being a problem later. Maybe that car is involved in an accident or something like that. So you want to make sure if you sell a car, that title's transferred and make sure you don't have that license plate on it when the person takes over the car. Because the last thing you want is for there to be an accident and then you're sued and saying, well, I wasn't even there. Like, well, you're the record owner of the car. And then like, oh boy, then you're hiring, an attorney to defend you. And, I don't do personal injury, but we have somebody in a group that does. And we know that could be a complicated situation, personal injury cases.
Now, we can talk about lots of standard real estate transactions, but one of the things that's common in other parts of the country, and I know this because I've dealt with it, is all that thing called a land contract, where, an individual is buying directly through the actual homeowner. And that, so those are pretty interesting agreements, aren't they? A land contract, because I know they should still be looked at through legal counsel to make sure that everything, the amortization schedule is on target, so when the actual home is transferred. So why don't you go into more things about the land contract, and then we'll wrap this bad boy up.
Sure. They could be very complicated. Different parts of the country have different agreements, but they could become, what are your rights and obligations on the sale of the property? They could become extremely complicated that you definitely not only need them read, you need them read by an attorney that understands them, and always get an attorney in your state. Well, let me strike that. Get an attorney in the area where the land is. So let's say you're a resident of Michigan, but you're buying a piece of property in Wisconsin. You need your Wisconsin lawyer to look at it. Your Michigan lawyer is not going to really be that good. If you're in Florida and you're buying something in New York, get a New York attorney to look at it. because they really vary from state to state, and you can get hooked, and you can get hooked
Yeah, I think that's the
quickly.
one common denominator, Ron. I'm glad you brought that up, okay? Is that people, you can hire an attorney locally. It doesn't do you any good when you cross state lines. In fact, let alone the fact that even if we were to take it a step further and you were to buy some sort of a agreement out in Canada. In fact, another area that came to mind are timeshares. Timeshares are very, very sticky agreements, aren't they, Ron? It's one thing to get a hold of them, but they are difficult to get rid of, aren't they?
They are timeshares, are very complicated agreements, and I think yes, you definitely need an attorney in the jurisdiction that the property is located in, because timeshares. I'm sure we've all heard through popular media all the bad stories about timeshares. So let's say you're living in Florida and you're buying a timeshare in Toronto. Get a Toronto attorney to look at it and make sure it complies with any law, and vice versa. If you're buying one in Florida and you're from Toronto, get a Florida attorney to review it, because they could be sticky wickets, that's for sure.
I would think timeshares are just a sticky situation, whether it's internationally or domestically. And I happen to live in a family which there was a time when they utilized them a lot more. Now you just have to make sure that are they worth the money versus the time you're going to be able to use them. Where at one point they were actually worthwhile. I know, for example, my mother-in-law, my late mother-in-law, my late father-in-law used to use theirs a lot. And a lot of us can use them if we need to. But what happens if you have a timeshare and then you're dealing with it? Are the kids going to be stuck with the goods in a timeshare agreement?
That's a good question. I think it depends on the law of the state, and it depends on the probate law of your state. Now you got to talk to your friendly probate attorney in the state that the property is to see where it goes, because those can be complicated situations, especially when you're dealing with a lot of family. Sometimes people want things, sometimes people don't. Then you're going into a whole nother area of law called probate, which you might want to have a show another time about that.
Never know what we'll come up with, Ron. That's for sure. You and I always come up with some things. But, so when we talk about today's broadcast in general about reading anything before you sign it, how do you want to put a bow on this broadcast about anything that we may have left off or haven't, or have covered everything?
Well, I just two simple points, and these are just suggestions. Number one, read anything before you sign it. Number two, if you have any concern or any questions, find a lawyer in the area that deals with that, whatever jurisdiction you're in. Have a lawyer explain it to you. That's what they're there for.
All right. Well, just, my name is Scott Morganroth. This is Ron Renzy. I'm the Motor City Bad Mouth. On a broadcast like this, I almost feel like the Motor City Mild Mouth, but no, I'm not going to trademark that. I got a reputation for sure. And Ron Renzy comes on here a couple times a month. Of course, he loves auto racing. That's the one thing about old Ron. Okay, there's more to this guy here than just the legal side. He has that auto racing side as well. And Ron, why don't you let everybody know how they can go ahead and reach you if they ever need any legal advice, whether it's in Florida or throughout the state, or whatever content information you want out there.
Sure. My law firm is Wahlberg and Renzy. We handle appellate practice and commercial litigation. We can be reached by telephone at 954-757-1212. Our website is wahlberg-renzy.com. And we are also at Wahlberg Renzy PA on Twitter and Facebook, as well as Instagram.
And of course, I met Ron here through the Coral Springs Chamber of Commerce. We've been in the same referral group for the last few years. And, once upon a time, I was in the alarm business. I got in the media, then people started paying a little bit more attention to me. And though I got to tell you, it's been fun with the group that I'm around. I should point out that to get a hold of us, this is the South Florida Tribune podcast. To subscribe to all of our broadcasts, well, the audio side, you can go ahead and do so through Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Let me go ahead and repeat that, go over some other basic information. You can subscribe to all of our podcasts through Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Our contact information is at Tribune South through Twitter, Facebook, South Florida Tribune Gets It Done, Instagram, South Florida Tribune. Of course, you're going to see this broadcast on the South Florida Tribune YouTube channel. Please subscribe to that, and then you'll be able to get all of our broadcasts with Ron, as well as everybody else here as well. We'll be doing this one I've already begun one with the Real and the Rare with Xavier McKnight, and there'll be many more announcements to be made in the future. Our website's www.southfloridatribune.com. You can find a lot of our broadcasts there. Our media distribution partners send us material as well as our columnists. And you can email me at southfloridatribune@gmail.com. And last but not least, if you want to go ahead and connect with me, you can do so on LinkedIn. My name is Scott Morganroth. I'll be more than happy to go ahead and contact you as well. Any closing thoughts, Ron? Hope you enjoyed your first broadcast, and I look forward to doing a lot more of these. I think we're really onto something. And as we become more and more accustomed to this technology, I see every reason why that not only can we take our voices audio, but now people can visualize what we're trying to do here. And that's our way of trying to make sure that we utilize technology to our benefit. Because during COVID-19, we've been certainly forced to do a lot of things far differently, Ron. Any closing thoughts before we wrap her up?
No, well, Scott, I'd just like to say thank you for having me here. And it's been fun. Now we're just, offering, as we say, shooting the breeze, offering some opinions. People can take them or leave them, but it's been a good night.
It sure is. And I look forward to doing many more of these broadcasts, Ron. Thank you very much. And we'll catch you the next time here. Be safe, everybody out there. And once again, we'll see you on the next edition of the South Florida Tribune podcast with Ron Renzy and the Motor City Man Mouth. Gonna leave on a loud note. Good night, everybody.